I've had the great chance to be here. Welcome, Madam Secretary and Commissioner, and let's just jump right in. Commissioner, in your own words, give us the state of Texas education, please.
Well, thank you. We actually produced a document to do just this. So the agency about, I don't know, 5 years ago when after I got started, we started to produce an annual report to try to tell the good and the bad, just the unvarnished truth of where we are as a state in terms of how well our system of public education is running. So if you Google TEA annual reports, you get an electronic copy. That's a copy from the office. So generally speaking, we spend about $71 billion. K-12 in the state of Texas. All funds going to school systems to support public education. That's where we're at. So ballpark $12,000, maybe $12,500 per kid. Actually, it might be over $13,000. With that money, we employ well over 700,000 people, of whom 300, roughly 75,000 are teachers. And as a fun fact, we have 60,000 more teachers than they do in the state of California, and 600,000 more students than we do. So we've got a lot of teachers. In terms of,
Commissioner, I'm sorry, I'm not sure if I'm the only one. We have some sound issues with you.
All right, let me try.
That's good.
Let me start.
Now we can hear.
Oh, now you can hear me. All right. They just needed it. My computer needed to hear your voice, and it started that. So we have a very large system of public education. There's 1,200 independently governed school systems, roughly 9,000 campuses, again, serving 5.5 million kids. How well are they doing? Like we don't have a system of public education in order to have all of that. We have a system of public education in order to teach kids. And so about a little under half of our kids are performing at grade level the way that we measure, dependent upon the grade and subject. And due to COVID, we have seen a significant backsliding in mathematics relative to where we were before. So you're somewhere between the mid 30s and the mid 40s in terms of mathematics in the elementary grades. Gets a little bit better as they get older in the system, but only a little bit better. We tend to do a little bit better in literacy, and have started to see in recent years actually some improvements in elementary literacy due in no small part to the significant investments the state is making in reading pedagogy and reading materials. When you look at outcomes at the high school level, about 90% of our kids graduate high school in 4 years on time, which is quite remarkable. But the question is, graduate prepared for what? So only about 65% of our kids are actually prepared to enter college, prepared to enter immediately a career that has some decent chance of paying them a decent wage, or prepared to enter the military. And when we look at, say, the 24-year-olds, so you think 6 years after high school graduation, an 18-year-old is then 24. Only about a little over a third of our kids have earned a bachelor's degree, an associate's degree, or some sort of meaningful trade credential by that time. So we got a lot upside. There's a lot of improvements that we can make. We have made some improvements in recent years, again, specifically, I think, in foundational literacy work, thanks to the investments that the legislature has made there and the focused policy attention. But if one thing I have learned in the last 24 months is that if you can avoid a global pandemic, you really should do that, because COVID has done us really no favors educationally, and the impact that could have long term on our kids is pretty profound. I've seen estimates that put the lifetime earnings decline.
Commissioner, I'm sorry. Some of the things we just simply can't hear. So I'm going to give you a second and we'll figure this out, but I'm going to go to Margaret. You've been a champion of high quality assessments as a means of accountability for schools throughout your career. What role do assessments play in the future of Texas schools?
Well, thank you, Glenn, and thank you to all of our partners who are hosting this event. I think you can tell by listening to Commissioner Morath that we have and very fine mind at the helm of this work. And he gave you all the data. How do we know that? We test the kids. We care enough to find out, as I like to say. And I'm a what gets measured gets done kind of gal. We know when we set priorities, when we align our curriculum with our measurement, when we align our teacher preparation, reading academies, and other professional development around those things, kids do better. And that's the name of the game. You know, I think we all know, certainly the chamber does, Glenn, that human capital is the coin of the realm in our economy, period, paragraph. We are in a globally competitive environment, and Texas has been a magnet for talent from around the country and around the world. But we still have a ton of work to do as we serve the needs of our own Texas-born students, and we have plenty of work to do. So it's critical not only for parents to find out how their kids are doing, but for us to be able to make the case to the legislature about where resources are needed. As I like to say, if we don't have a problem, we don't need a solution. If we don't have a problem, we don't need charter schools. We don't need reading academies. We don't need better paid teachers working in challenging environments, and on and on. So it's a policy tool. It's a tool for parents. And very importantly, it's a tool for educators. And the commissioner, Mike, if I may, is doing tremendous work to make sure that our educators have real-time information about how kids are doing through improvements he's making to the STAR test. And more instant feedback via technology. He can talk more about that, but it is an absolutely essential part of our policy making, of our trajectory and our journey to close the achievement gap. And just like any enterprise, any business, no one would try to run an enterprise without finding out where you are, holding yourself accountable, quarterly earnings reports, annual reports like the one that Mike is issuing today. And it would be at our peril to move away from those policies that are bearing fruit for Texas kids.
You've made a very persuasive case, and could you just maybe describe for the chamber leaders on the call a little bit about the state of play right now with our state's accountability system, please?
Absolutely. Well, may I first say, here's the bottom line. Here's what you need to know, business community. Steady as she goes on House Bill 3. It is working. Obviously, COVID set us back, and we have to triage and create a sense of urgency around catching up. But the reforms that were put in place a couple of sessions ago that many on this call, especially the commissioner, Todd Williams, will hear from later, others, had so much to do with, are bearing fruit. Number one, yes, there are always things we can do to make improvements, but steady as she goes, our accountability system is strong and sound. And you know, some of the narrative that you hear from others who want to distract ourselves from student achievement really suggests that we ought to have metrics like physical fitness or band or extracurricular activities. You know, employers want to know, can you read and cipher to sufficient levels to be an effective employee or manager or leader? And that is what we have to hold ourselves accountable for. We do not need to obfuscate the data. And, you know, when I hear people say, well, it's just one test on one day, my head explodes because that's not true. We have a campus rating, Mike can tell you more about it, that's very sophisticated, that takes a lot of dimensions into account, including performance over time, preparation around workforce readiness, and on and on. So steady as she goes, stay the course on muscular assessment, transparency, accountability, and resourcing these challenges we know that we have in ways that are data informed and research based.
Well said. Commissioner, let's talk a little bit about HB 3, which was a very important and transformational piece of legislation in 2019. Where do you see opportunities, and where do you see the need for perhaps some additional investments? And we are blessed to be in a state with a $32.7 billion surplus as compared to California, which has a $22 billion deficit. Just wanted to work that in.
Let me do a quick mic check. Is this thing working better? Can you hear me?
Great,
Okay,
really
good.
great. Thank you.
All right, and if it breaks again, let me know. I got a headset around here. So, no, House Bill 3 did a lot, and it was a significant resource infusion per pupil funding infusion. But money doesn't get you outcomes. Money's a tool. The how you use it matters a great deal. And there were 3 or 4 things in the bill that were pretty profound. One is the bill set up a long-term transformation in how we compensate our teachers. Something called the teacher incentive allotment is designed to get teachers to reach 6-figure salaries and to reward teachers who are working in the highest needs areas, and not based on a popularity contest, but based upon results. So this is a huge deal. And we're in the, I don't know, second inning of a 9-inning game on that particular transformation. And it's a big deal. Another thing that the bill did was it funded elementary schools, if they wish to extend their school calendar into summer. And when you think about our most at-risk kids, some of the neediest communities in the state, learning does in fact happen every time that a child is awake, whether they're at school or not at school. And so can we structure stronger supports, especially for our most at-risk kids? There's no other state in the country that has created a funding entitlement for elementary school to do this. And if you want to eliminate the achievement gap, you need good content, good teaching, and more of it. And that's essentially what's in House Bill 3. The last key piece I'll talk about in terms of House Bill 3, Margaret alluded to a minute ago, but there's a set of new supports and requirements built in terms of foundational literacy. Teachers are provided with a year-long fellowship in the science of teaching reading to understand exactly how it is that eager young minds acquire literacy skills at high levels. But more so than that, the bill established content standards for instructional materials, think textbooks that you would use in schools. And this is, I think, one of the areas where this really does matter, and we don't pay nearly enough attention to it. And so if I think about building on House Bill 3, I would take that foundational setup for elementary phonics instruction K through 3 and expand it to provide far more supports so that teachers have well-developed lessons on rigorous content. I have been in Texas classrooms where kids are reading Shakespeare in 5th grade, and they are all low income, and they're doing it well. This is not the norm. This is an anomaly. But we already know that it can happen with the right kind of content supports, the right kind of instructional materials, the right kind of textbooks. And we need to do a much better job, I think, providing that kind of support to our teachers. And when we do, this is a rigor infusion in the system. It is one of the most significant increases in both support for teachers, because they no longer have to be on Google and Pinterest on Friday night at 9 p.m. trying to find lesson content because it's already been given to them. And by the way, there's some weird stuff on Google and Pinterest. And then in addition to that, the kids get exposed to real rigor. I'm not reading about a trip to the ice cream store. I'm reading about the War of 1812. This is the stuff that we want them to read. We send kids to school to learn good stuff. Let's make sure the teachers have good stuff to teach from. So that's, I think, the sort of next stage in expanding the great work that was established with House Bill 3.
How should we be thinking?
Can I just
Yeah,
add
please.
quickly onto that? My friend Sharon Vaughn at UT Austin says it's not that we're asking too much from our kids, it's that we're asking too little. And so we can raise the bar, they can rise to the occasion, and they must if they're going to make it in the world before them. And so I really commend, and we're proud to be a part of this next iteration of better materials, asking more of our kids, and the business community has to be a critical part of that effort.
And Margaret, you're absolutely right. We need to ask more of our kids. They could do it. They have the capacity to do it. And Commissioner Margaret, I want to tie some things. I'm a big baseball fan, and I know Massey's very happy that the Astros won another world championship. I was born in the Bronx. I'll just say that. I know Woody Hunt is participating and is on this call, and his report from the Texas Commission on Community College Finance Recommendations is superb. It ties really dollars to more results and a connection to employment, which is the end of the game. And I think of the K through 12, the pre-K and the K through 12 system, it feeds up to community college, vocational schools and universities. How should we be thinking about that in terms of career and technical education, as well as college credit, whether it's dual enrollment? What are some things that we can do to enhance that? We know if kids are getting college credit or they're getting certificates in key areas, they're ready to rock and roll post high school. And just would love your thoughts on that.
Well, what I would say is over the last 5 years, and this, I want to come back to the discussion of the accountability system. There have been pretty substantive policy shifts in the state of Texas to create very strong incentives to get kids ready for careers directly in high school. So in order to earn an A in the accountability system in high school, do kids need to perform well on STAR tests? You betcha, but that's actually only 40% of the rating. What they need is they need high SAT scores. They need a welding certificate. They need an associate's degree. They need dual credit coursework. It is a very well-rounded measure of their both academic readiness to proceed in, a liberal arts education while they're going into post-secondary, but also career readiness. And so this is an incentive system. Sometimes you think about the pendulum, is it all academic college for all? Is it all career vocational for all? It actually needs to be both. It's unless they were born independently wealthy, everybody's going to work. And so we want to make sure that they can read, write, and do math and do it at a high level, but they are given key vocational training while they're in school. And this started with a shift in the A through F system. There have been now financial incentives by the legislature to do career and technical education. And I think the recommendations that came out of the commission that Hunt has led is truly critical, because this sort of coordinated partnership between higher ed and K-12, and specifically community colleges and K-12, is pretty critical. The major growth that we have seen academically in high school in terms of academic attainment for our kids has all come in dual credit coursework that's been expanded, and ensuring that there is universal access to that, because if you're in a very high property wealth community college district, there's a lot of resources for it. But if you're in some rural community college district, doesn't have as much wealth, we need to make sure those kids have access to strong dual credit opportunities, both on the academic and on the trade side. So this is, we have started down this road in earnest in the last 5 years. There's been an explosion in what are called P-Tech high schools in Texas. There's a specific financial incentive, also part of House Bill 3 that did that. And we, when I was named commissioner, we had one P-Tech high school in Texas. It was in Dallas, which I came from. I was there to make it. And a P-Tech high school is about getting kids, so when they graduate high school, they have a high school diploma, they have an associate's degree, it is trade focused, they have a specific trade credential, and they've already had a couple of years of work experience with a major employer. This is that's the three legs of the stool. This is the trifecta. And so we've seen a huge jump in the number of kids graduating high school with associate's degrees, and nothing says you're college ready like you already finished. And we have about 250 schools now that have converted to that P-Tech model, and a bunch more in the pipeline. So I think continued investments like those that have been suggested by the Community College Finance Commission, as well as investments in the K-12 side for rigorous academic and CTE preparation. We're already on a really good path. We need more of it.
And Glenn, this is a place where the business community really has to play an important role. So P-Tech is, the Cadillac is the high end, but not all dual enrollment is created equal. And so the business community needs to take a real clear-eyed view of what is happening. We've got lots of floral design going on out there in the name of IBC, and lots of Microsoft Office. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but let's really be pretty critical about how those IBC courses really live and fit in the real workplace.
Thank you, Margaret. I don't know if our audience has any questions while we still have time. If you do, please raise your hand, or please put something in the chat box. But I'll get back down to nuts and bolts. Got a surplus. There's going to be some additional investment in K through 12 education. What are the best ways to invest any additional resources into our K through 12 system? And I'll throw that to Margaret and the commissioner.
Well, Mike has already answered the question. High quality instructional materials. Investing in effective educators where we need them most in our most challenging places. More investment in technology. I think we've well post-COVID that we really need to maximize the effectiveness of that tool so that we can deploy more college-ready dual enrollment courses around the full swath of our state. We need to support the investments of House Bill 3. And of course, you're going to hear a lot about property tax relief along the way, but that's my hit list.
Commissioner, anything else?
I can't improve on that.
Well, I want to thank our outstanding panelists for being with us here this morning. You're both great champions for K through 12. Any final words of inspiration for our chamber leaders in terms of how that they could really impact the education system and make sure that we have a great session?
Mike, you go first.
So 15 years ago, I was running a software company, living a very lovely, quiet life. I spent a month climbing mountains in the Himalaya. Nobody cared. Nobody tracked me on social media. But this is the thing. Our kids require people of talent and integrity to step up and say, like, I have got to get involved. I've got to take ownership for what happens in our schools. I was a big brother for about 10 years, part of the Big Brothers Big Sisters program. My first little turned 16, sits down in front of a computer at my house, and he's applying for a job at Brahms, and he cannot fill out the entry-level job application at Brahms without my help. And so sold my software company, ran for the school board because I did not want that to happen ever again to anybody. And none of my brothers and sisters in this world should be at 16 and arrive there. But evil triumphs when the good do nothing. So we just have to, everybody has to take responsibility for what's going on in the schools, get your hands dirty, and get engaged because it's a big system. We spend $71 billion on people. And those people are used to doing things a certain way, and which would be fine if the outcomes that we get right now were good enough for our kids, but they're not. And so we are going to have to change the way the system works continuously. And it takes thoughtful supports and the wisdom and insight of folks that have been successful in the private sector mixed with the wisdom and insight of folks that have been teaching for long periods of time to raise the bar and to change processes. So I know I'm preaching the choir here because everybody else on this call has already donated huge amounts of time and energy to trying to improve public education, but we need as much as you got. And I want you to help our kids. So anyways, I just thanks to this group.
He wasn't fishing for compliments, but I think we all know how lucky we are to have Commissioner Morath at the helm, because the legislature passes policies and then they have to be implemented. And I'm so glad that Mike Morath has his hand on the rudder. And that'll be even more true as we reinvent the process for high quality instructional materials. Look, the business community in Texas, and I've been knocking around this stuff for a long time, has always been what I call a critical partner in both senses of the word. We need some table pounding from the business community about the state of affairs. We need to continue for you all to build that civic demand for change, for resources, for improvement, for urgency. And we know that you're in it for the long haul because you have been. And so Woody and all the folks on here who've been knocking around this stuff literally for decades, I thank you. I'm glad that Mike Morath is at the helm, and Glenn, you too. TAB has been an essential part of this reform movement that frankly has been unique in the nation, and we are the beachhead for good policy. So we cannot rest on our laurels, but stay mighty through the session, and look forward to working with everybody on this call and around the state.
Well, Secretary Spellings, Commissioner Morath, thank you for the very thoughtful commentary. Thank you for your great leadership. It reminds me on the business side, there's a lot we could do in terms of internships and getting young people engaged in our businesses and our chamber our chamber member businesses as part of the learning process as well. So we all have a role to play, and just want to thank you for being on this panel this morning. We're inspired in Chamberville.
Thanks, Glenn. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you. And now I'd like to turn it over to our good friends, Taylor Landin of the Powerhouse Greater Houston Partnership and Kelly Hall from the Longview Chamber, who's a force of nature and helps bring all of the chamber community together. And they're going to have a legislative conversation. Thank you.
Hey, Glenn, great to see you this morning. Man, Kelly, you and I have our work cut out for us following the commissioner and Margaret. You'd be hard pressed to find two people that are more engaged and on top of their game when it comes to education policy. And we're really lucky to have them here in Texas. And they talked, Kelly, a little bit about it. I'll introduce you and myself a little bit deeper. But first, let's talk about what we're going to talk about this morning, which is they talked about building that civic demand for policy. They talked about getting our hands dirty. And so what we're going to talk about is how we do that in our respective chambers around the state. So and really lucky to have Kelly Hall with us. She's president of the Longview Chamber of Commerce and just a really, really inspiring chamber leader who has knows how to mobilize support in her community. And really, Kelly, there's few people around the state that are able to engage in issues the way that you and your business community do. And so we're looking forward to that discussion. I should introduce myself. My name is Taylor Landin. I lead the Public Policy Division as Chief Policy Officer for the Greater Houston Partnership. And we're, of course, the principal economic development organization and chamber in the Houston region, and really deeply involved in a lot of issues that we've talked about already this morning, from the public education to community college, and we'll probably touch on some others. But so without further ado, let me just Kelly, ask you a very broad question, which is what in your experience have you learned as through the years of why is doing what you do in Longview, Texas, why is it so important? Why is that advocacy so impactful? And what can others around the state learn from what you've been able to build in Longview?
Thanks, Taylor. I think the most important thing to me is understanding the chamber's why. And I'm showing my age. I've been in the industry since 1986. When I started in the chamber industry, I honestly did not realize that our differentiator is our advocacy work. And that's why chambers were started. We were started to protect the interest of business. We were started to make sure there was not over-regulations and that there was reasonable legislation in place that allows us to protect the free enterprise system, to protect capitalism and encourage prosperity. And I think too often in small, mid-sized chambers, we lose that piece of our business. And I think it's important that as chamber executives, we take the time to develop our board, handpick our volunteers to ensure we don't lose focus and become just like every other social club in town. And the next thing you know, we're throwing parties, we're doing pageants, and we have parades. All are important things for quality of life, but that's not why a chamber was formed. And so when we go back to who we are, but more importantly, the why we are in existence, that's when we can engage our volunteers and develop these partnerships with industry leaders like yourself, Tab, Margaret, Commissioner Morath, and bring those voices to our local level and to our peers. It just helps us become a stronger organization.
Yeah, that's well put. And I've always found in my experience in the chamber world is that a lot of times the most difficult thing to do is articulate the value proposition associated with advocacy and policy work. But it's absolutely essential. And that is really, if you're going to build an enduring organization that's having real impact in your respective communities, the advocacy piece is so important. And so maybe let's get down to the very base level. Among the leaders that are on this call today, let's paint a hypothetical, which is maybe they haven't even they don't have the function, or maybe they've dabbled in it, they've formed a committee, maybe they've put pen to paper on a legislative agenda, but talk to that chamber leader that really at a personal level, they understand that they need to be involved, but it can be very daunting to dip your toe in. And so what's the first step, the second step, and then to really try to build that function inside of a chamber? And maybe if I could lead you a bit, impress upon all of us that it is not the hardest thing in the world to do. And in fact, there's a lot of partners, whether it's us at the Greater Houston Partnership or Texas Association of Business, we would love nothing more than to partner with everyone to achieve advocacy objectives. So, but just talk a little bit about where to start and demystify that process.
I think that's a good place to start too. The first chamber I was at, I was a one-person chamber, just to kind of, let's put it out there. I get it. Second chamber, two-person chamber, third chamber, four-person, and we've grown. So I've grown in the industry, and I've learned a lot of things the hard way, trying to recreate the wheel, thinking it was all about me when it's not, it has nothing to do with me. It's about leaning on the people who have the strength and the experience to help us grow as individuals and grow our organizations. So when I was started, the first thing was local. It's those local relationships. And it wasn't going to city council meetings. It was going to lunch with the city manager or going to lunch with council members, because that's where the work happens, is through relationship building. So I would back up and say, what are those most critical relationships? And our local relationships are priority number one. And we can have more discussion on that. But at the state level, our state chamber is the Texas Association of Business. That is our go-to organization. And they have the capacity, from a human capacity to a financial capacity, to do so much more than those of us who have small teams or no teams. And so we use TAB, as our handbook. If you don't have time to serve on one of the task forces, it's okay, but at least start with their legislative platform, because businesses and chambers from across the state bring their lens, their expertise to the table to help shape policy. Then we can take that information back to our board of directors. It doesn't mean we have to adopt everything, because it may not be what's best for us, but it's a starting place, and we don't have to do that intense research and data collection. We all have opinions, but our decisions need to be based on facts and what's best for our business community. So taking the information and vetting it at the local level is really important. Now, I personally have gotten away from electronic surveys, because we have found that only about 13% of our members answer those surveys, and it may not even be the customers that I want providing that valuable input. So I'm going to pre-select who those key influencers are within our community to vet materials and bring the recommendations back to our board. Stephanie, Glenn, their team members, they're willing to get on a Zoom call with our boards. They don't even have to come in person, but you see Glenn all over the state. So if you want him to come, just book it well in advance outside of a session. So they're willing to work with us to give us the ability to speak knowledgeably, or pretend like we're speaking knowledgeably, because they've done all the heavy lifting. I think too often we think we have to do that lifting, and that's not reality. So for me, that's where I would start. Now, I will tell you, since Texas 2036 arrived, you know, TAB was our only, in my opinion, one of the only sources we had for that type of research. Now we've got this amazing organization, Texas 2036, that has poured their heart and soul into data collection like I've never seen before. And as a nerd, I so enjoy getting on their website and learning and connecting dots and taking what TAB has done to what Texas 2036 is doing and bridge that for us at a local level. Now, if you have the time to pour in more, I love to see teamwork happen at the community level. So we have 10 policy teams. They're made up of anywhere from 3 individuals to 5 individuals. And those, then we can pour through more of the information to make sure we are in opposition or supporting issues that are important to us. And I guess the last thing is, keep it simple, stupid. Don't try to adopt everything TAB does or everything Texas 2036 is working on. So at a local level, we may have spent 5 years building, 18 pages of policies from a federal and state level, but we didn't do it overnight. It took years of work and research and learning. Start with 3. We are here to protect what? The free enterprise system. So make sure we are building a business environment that does that. Job creation. By golly, this state worked hard in the late 80s with business leaders and key influencers to put policies in place. Let's make sure we can keep the jobs and keep attracting them. We got to have a workforce. If we don't have accountability and standards, how do we know how we're doing? So keep it simple.
Yeah, Kelly, I mean, there's a lot there in that answer, and you're right. It is simple at its core. And what I'm sure you experience is that when you put simple ideas in front of sophisticated business leaders and say, hey, we can have an impact, it really resonates, and it really it gets them excited to be engaged in these issues. One thing I think is important is that a lot of folks, think, oh my gosh, policy or advocacy is going to get me in trouble with my local elected officials, or it's going to cause divisiveness inside of the organization because we can't agree on this policy position or that. But there are so many issues that are critical to the future of the state that chambers should be involved in. Education is the easiest one. You mentioned workforce development, and there's really not much to argue with when you realize that the curriculum reform and the high quality instruction material that the commissioner was mentioning earlier. I think we can all agree that it's unacceptable that only 19% of students in the state of Texas are receiving curriculum at their respective grade level. That should be unacceptable, and we should fix it from a policy standpoint. And those are the kinds of things that when you put issues like that in front of your board and utilize the information that is readily available from whether it's 2036 or TAB, I mean, the information's there, and so there's, let others kind of do the work and benefit from that. We all do. So anyway, I just thought it's important to mention that not all of these issues are incredibly contentious. There's a lot to agree on, and then in order to march forward, I think that the more that we can have chamber organizations weighed in on these issues, it really makes an impact. And so one thing that you mentioned in there is the role of your policy teams. Let's expand that out to the just wide array of coalitions that are formed throughout the state on literally every issue. And I can't tell you how many conversations I'm in on a regular basis over the years where they say, if only we could get the chamber community mobilized and engaged. And we in the chamber community we can be a force if we're organized around particular issues. So maybe Kelly, talk a little bit about maybe some of the coalitions that you're involved in, and then in the role that they play in kind of helping you carry forward your agenda.
So I love this phrase, problems to platforms to possibilities. So we know in Longview, Texas, we have a problem with third grade reading levels and fifth grade, but we've got to start at third grade reading levels. So we've identified that as a problem. Because of the relationships that have been built with Commit Partnership, Texas 2036, Texas Association for Business, Texas Business Leadership Council, and then if you get to the national level, you've got the Business League United, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, Nation Ready. These are all the resources in Kelly's toolbox. And I've spent time developing those relationships with the experts within those organizations so I can learn how to take the problem of third grade reading, link that to K through 12, career college pathways. What are we going to do about it? So we start with a problem and we create a platform around it. And then we bring that business community together, and then we have speakers come in, whether it's to a board meeting, a state of education, whatever that looks like. Having Margaret at our banquet this last Tuesday night, even though it was Zoom because iced in, it still awakens the individuals. They're like, you know, we hear Kelly talk about third grade reading levels and why it's the beginning point of career pathways. We can leverage these relationships and build a platform, but it's going to also require a little investment of time. And rather than trying to do a program in a school, why not get the sponsors to help us hire a consultant to learn to message effectively and develop a campaign to launch that platform at the local level, connect the dots with our state elected officials, and maybe then be replicated in other places across the state. Because it doesn't matter our size. Size does not matter within the organization. It's where we put our time and talent and treasure that matters. And if we're so busy doing the fluff, we can't have, our actions will not have impact for the long term.
Yeah, that's so well said. It's so important to be engaged in the issues that really matter in the community, and leave some of the, as you say, fluff to others. There's plenty that will step into that void. So we've got probably about 10 minutes left, Kelly. I do want to be sure that those that are on the call and have questions, be sure to put that in the Q&A section there at the bottom of the screen, and we'll try to get to those, as many as we can. I want to circle back, Kelly, where you started on your comments about relationships. And one of my favorite stories is there's a former Speaker of the House loves to tell the story about how he would sometimes be walking to the floor to vote, and the president of one of his local chambers would call and would say, hey, I need you to support this issue or that issue, whatever it is. And that phone call alone would dictate or have considerable influence over the way he thought about how he was voting. And so I think it's important for all of us to recognize that if you build the relationships and invest in the relationships, that then you have an incredible opportunity, regardless of the size of your organization, to at least be one important input in the way that a key policymaker, lawmaker is considering how to handle an issue. So anything you would add to that?
If we as leaders in our community have not built the relationships with our mayor, council, state rep, state senator, congressman, US senator, shame on us. And I can tell you, I have watched testimony online, and our state rep is a personal friend. He was our mayor for 10 years. So we've been through a lot of good and bad together. And then I'll be watching and I'm texting Jay, our state rep, and I'm going, really? You voted on this way, you know, or we need you. Do you remember our policies? We want you to do this. And so having that relationship is important. And that they can't take your call when they're on the floor sitting there getting ready to vote. Now, before it gets to that point, better know who the staff is too. So it's important to know those key staffers in our elected officials' office and understand their roles. And then who do we need to communicate with on which priorities? Because depending on the size of their team, that really does make a difference. You know, within our senator's office, I'm not going to call Senator Hughes. I'm going to call one of his legislative people.
Yeah.
And say, teach me. I'm going to ask a ton of, do you have 10 minutes? I need to ask questions I don't understand. What information can we provide to help better decision making? Because they are getting bombarded from every lobby group across the state. Their peers, you know, their elected official peers, you know, they've got chips to play, like in a hand of poker. So we've got to figure out where we fit in that game. And if we don't have that relationship, we don't know what chip to play. And we sure don't want to throw out chips that don't mean anything. We want to use them the right way to do what's best for our business community.
Yeah, no, well said. Let's spend our remaining moments talking a little bit about some specific issues. There was the community college finance reform was mentioned earlier. I know Commissioner Hunt has been the recommendations that were put forward by the commission, and I see I believe Dr. Hellier is going to speak to the group here in a little while. Those set of recommendations have the potential to be transformational for community colleges around the state. And it has a lot to do with ensuring that kids are career ready. And so that is something from a workforce development standpoint that every chamber around the state should be very, very vocal on how important it is to get those pieces of the community college reform over the finish line. The other thing, we got a question on third grade reading scores and kind of how that ties to the workforce development pipeline. Can you talk about why you guys in Longview, and I know we focus on it in the Houston area very, very intently. Why is third grade reading such an important measure in education?
Well, it's really the beginning point of career pathway. So if our kiddos my child could not read at third grade level and he's 39 now, very successful, but he couldn't read in the third grade. Matter of fact, it took us till fifth grade to get him through multisensory learning, etc. But we have to be aware of where the kids are, whether they're our kids, our grandkids, someone else's kids, because that's the future workforce. So that's the entry point to success. And if your school districts are like our school districts, we have a predominant Hispanic population base in all of our elementary campuses, and they may be first or second generation, but the language spoken in the home is Spanish. So we have to be paying attention of how to walk alongside our school districts and arm them with what they need to be successful. We don't have to be accusers. School districts have enough accusers. We need to be part of that solution. But if we don't have the data to back up the conversation, to understand that local predicament, then how do we know when we need to bring in a mentoring, organization to come in and mentor and help the teachers in the summer and after school to get those scores up to where they need to be? The challenges I mean, Commissioner Morath has provided some amazing workshops over the years that's helped me understand the importance of diving into the data and how that classroom and functions and how those campuses function. Because then we get them to the 5th grade. If they can't read at the 5th grade, they don't pass the math. Because the math problems, a lot of them are written, they're comprehension based, critical thinking skills are there. Teachers are not teaching to a test in reading. That's BS. So let's get the data and understand how to help districts get successful, because we can do all the CTE work on TCCF recommendations all day long. But if we don't have the product ready to go into those programs, we're setting ourselves up for failure. It's really simple.
Yeah, yeah. And as my friend Mary Lynn at Texas 2036 loves to say, that in the up to the 3rd grade, you're learning to read, and then after the 3rd grade, you're reading to learn. And if we don't have them on grade level by the 3rd grade, the likelihood of them catching up just becomes incredibly much more challenging to get that child back on path. It looks, I don't see any other questions in our chat. Kelly, why don't we wrap by maybe just reiterating what are encouraging, maybe I'll say, the leaders that are on this call. What is the one step that they should take after this time together today? What is the one step they can take to get engaged, to put their organization out there, perhaps for the first time, to get involved in this in the legislative process?
Well, I think we're going to talk about the TCCF recommendations in just a minute. The chambers, the 32 chambers that I try to email on a regular basis in East Texas, I've asked them to sign on. That's easy. Do you believe, we believe in workforce development. This is the best workforce development tool I've seen in a long time, where we can partner with our community colleges and advocate. Sign on, drop your logo into the form. And I know that there's going to be a QR code at the end of this presentation, not ours, but at the end of today. Go there, sign on, get your chamber's buy-in, and let's just have across the state, show up to support something. That's all. I mean, it's a first step. If you don't feel comfortable and you say, "Ooh, I need to back up," well, then reach out to Kelly at Texas 2036 Commit, or reach out to Stephanie at TAB and get a speaker to the board to help them understand this is a win-win, because our community colleges are on board. They've done the work for the last 2 years. Let's get on board.
That's right. And that issue, Kelly, is really, really, obviously it's important, but it's a great place for the chamber community to unite and mobilize around supporting those recommendations. There's plenty of work to do on the K-12 side, and a whole range of issues. If there's, but in those that perhaps, want to take that first step, or even go deeper in what they already have, please make all of us that are on this call today consider us a resource, and let us help any way that we can to advance the function inside of your organization. I know we'd be really, really excited to do that. So Kelly, thank you so much for the time today. Enjoyed our conversation, and look forward to seeing you in Austin.
Thanks. Bye.
All right. Well, with that, I think I'm going to hand it over to my friend AJ Rodriguez with Texas 2036 to go much deeper on the recommendations from the community college finance. So let me not steal any more of your thunder, AJ, and hand it over to you.
No, very good, Taylor and Kelly. Wonderful, as always. Wonderful panels this morning. Terrific job. And I want to go ahead and introduce myself. I'm AJ Rodriguez. I'm Executive Vice President of Texas 2036. I'm going to briefly introduce our panel, but before I do, just want to again thank you, Taylor, for that excellent presentation. Greater Houston Partnership is a wonderful partner of ours at Digital Texas and Aim Higher Texas. And of course, what will we do without the famous Kelly Hall at the Longview Chamber. When I was chair of the Texas Association of Business in 2018, I would often do the WWKHD rule before making decisions. So what would Kelly Hall do? So appreciate all your extraordinary leadership on behalf of your area and your region and the state. So with that, I want to thank our esteemed panelists that have joined us this morning. We have the senior chairman of Hunt Companies based in El Paso, Woody Hunt, who also chaired the Community College Finance Commission during the interim. We also have our founding CEO of the Commit Partnership as well here to join us today, Todd Williams. He's our Texas 2036 partner in all things education. And of course, our chancellor of San Jacinto College, affectionately known as San Jack, Dr. Brenda Hellier. And I hope she'll also share with us some information about their unified mascot. I did a little reading up on that, Brenda, so I'd love to hear more about that process, which is intriguing. And she was also a member of our Community College Finance Commission, so thank you for your participation leadership there. We're going to talk for about 30 minutes, and then we're going to also run into the Q&A as well. So feel free to put questions in the chat that are out, and we'll refer to those a little bit later in the discussion. So with that, Chairman Hunt, thank you so much for your leadership on the Texas Commission on Community College Finance. Tell us a little bit about the work that was performed there that you've been doing over the last year and a half.
Thank you, AJ. So the commission was created by Senate Bill 1230 in 87th legislative session in 2021. Had 12 commission members, 2 state senators, two state House representatives, 4 community college presidents, a faculty member, a member representative of the Texas Community College Board of Trustees, and 2 members of the business community, myself and Todd Williams, sits on the phone today. So our first meeting was November 15th of 2021. We had 7 full commission public meetings between then and October of 2022, which was our last meeting when we delivered or approved the final report. But starting in February of 22 through the summer, we broke into 3 subcommittees. And those subcommittees did the substance of the work. The public meetings we took invited and public testimony from state of Texas experts as well as national experts, often by Zoom, sometimes in person. So a lot of input, a lot of data gathering throughout that period to help us create the report, which we were mandated to deliver by the 1st of November to the governor, which we did. So.
Yeah, appreciate that, Chairman Hunt, Woody. That excellent work, and that report was just tremendous in terms of all the heavy lifting that you all did on that commission. Todd, I'm going to turn it over to you and just ask you to walk us through the work of the commission as well, and just community college finance reform. You know, why is it necessary for our state right now?
Well, I think what I love about that commission and the commission that we worked on in 2018 to focus on K-12 is it really tries to figure out through data what are the challenges that are facing us, and tries to come up in a very thoughtful way some key provisions that will attack those challenges head on. When you think about what's going on here in Texas, we have an incredibly strong job market. The question is, do we have the skilled workers to do those jobs? I think I saw a recent Dallas Fed survey where roughly 70% of Texas business leaders said they don't have the applicants to fill those jobs. And when you focus just on small businesses, the number was closer to 90%. And you know, one of the challenges that we have is that roughly 65% of total jobs and 95% of new jobs require some type of post-secondary credential. But as Commissioner Morath highlighted earlier, today we're only seeing about 1 in 4 kids get a post-secondary credential by the age of 24. It could be a BA, could be an associate's, could be a workforce certificate. And so the recommendations really focused on where are we losing kids and what are the things that we could do to make sure that we're providing the right strategic resourcing to make that happen and change those outcomes.
Fantastic.
AJ, if I could, let me add to Todd's remarks. And I think, at least from my perspective, what drove the commission recommendations was two macro trends that are out there. Todd alluded to one of them, and that is we've got this hyper competitive state, ninth largest economy in the world, grew by 16% between 2010 and 4 million new residents. So we were the leading state by any metric, if you want to look at it. This hyper competitive environment created, we think most of us assume, by our tax policy, regulatory policy, tort reforms that we instituted. So it's really driving growth. To me, the bigger question that needs to be answered is that growth with prosperity or growth without prosperity? Because just because you have growth doesn't mean it's going to be with prosperity. And I think that's largely going to be determined by the post-secondary attainment in your workforce. In other words, the skills that are required to deliver quality jobs that support growth are increasingly going to require post-secondary attainment. I would call those jobs self-sufficient jobs. They're jobs that the holder of that job can support themselves and their family without third-party government assistance. So is our growth going to create those jobs? And if it does, it should be growth with prosperity. But those jobs are going to require an increasing level. A marketplace is telling us, as Todd alluded, that it's an increasing level of post-secondary attainment is going to be required. So when you look at the state and you say, where are we on that measurement versus other states? And I've looked at this data for a long time. I've always used kind of 1980 as my baseline, because at that moment in time, Texas was in the second quartile versus other states in post-secondary attainment of our workforce. We were 3% above the median. If you fast forward to from 1980 census to 2020 census, we're now in the bottom quartile, upper end of the bottom quartile, number 39. And then since then, data that's come out after the census, which is a projection through 2031, has us competing somewhere between with Nevada and Arkansas for spots 46, 47, and 48. So you essentially have Texas from 1980 to 2030, going from a competitive post-secondary education of our workforce to competing for the very bottom spots. Thank God for Louisiana and New Mexico, or it might be worse. So, and if you look at the data, which Todd alluded to on the coordinating board, does an 8th grade study, which is, to me, the gold standard data that we ought to look at. And the latest data is 2012. We had 360,000 8th graders in 2012. 58% of those were economically disadvantaged. And the overall rate of that 360,000, 22% of them have 10 years later, 4 years to graduate from high school, 6 years to get any kind of post-secondary credential. 22% of them had achieved that. But if those that were economically disadvantaged completed at a rate 42% of those that were not economically disadvantaged. And then if you look at our demographics, our Hispanic population, 177,000 of the 360,000 8th graders were Hispanic. They completed at a rate 59% of our non-Hispanic whites, which were 115,000 of those 8th graders. 47,000 of the 8th graders were African American. They completed at a rate of 52% of our non-Hispanic whites. So we know where the gaps are, and we know this long-term trend is not that each racial and ethnic group in the state is better educated today than they were yesterday, will be better educated tomorrow than they are today. But our growth in our population has essentially almost all been in groups that have historically been less successful in post-secondary attainment. So what was really driving us here is if the state is not prepared to lead and intervene, we're going to be 46, 47, 48 or worse at the end of this decade. And now is the time for a transformational intervention if we want to stop the slide. And so I think that was the largest driving force on the recommendation. The second, and very briefly, is the other trend that came out of the that's also a demographic one, was our population growth. So even though we grew 16%, we had 143 of 254 counties that lost population. And when you, almost another 100 that grew less than the state. So it gets down to 10 counties that are creating most of the job growth, population growth, and certainly the high demand, high skilled growth is concentrated in those 10 counties. So you have a supply that's statewide, you have demand that's highly concentrated, but when you have population loss, and half of our community colleges are 5,000 or fewer students, many of them located in those areas that are losing population, which means they're losing tax base. And yet we have a supply that is statewide, and to give a statewide supply that has competitive educational outcomes. So whether they decide to stay at home or whether they decide to move to one of these 10 counties will be up to them. But the state policy issue would be, are they going to have a competitive educational outcome where they can compete with jobs, whether they move or whether they stay at home? So that was the other thing that was a macro influence on our recommendations. So that's just background for the discussion today.
No, appreciate that, Woody. In that context, we're going to have 10 million more people here between now and 2036, our bicentennial. And as you've characterized it, it's a challenge, but it could be a tremendous opportunity as well. So well stated. I'm going to shift over and let's dive a little bit deeper into the recommendations. And we have Dr. Brenda Hellier here who can give us her perspective, having served as the Chancellor of San Jac, and I'm sure you've had several conversations with your colleagues about these recommendations and shifting to a majority outcomes funding. So talk to us a little bit about how our community colleges are feeling about these outcomes funding basis being so prominent in the funding structure.
Thanks, AJ, and I'm delighted to be here with Woody and Todd. So as the Senate Bill 1230 was coming forward out of that last session, the community colleges were really the ones that were behind that. We felt we needed a new funding model. Our state funding had declined over the years pretty significantly. Our three major revenue sources had been state appropriations, tuition, and fees, and property taxes. And so we really decided we needed to have this new model if we were really going to be able to make sure all Texans were being served by community colleges. And just to put some context, there's 50 community college districts within the state of Texas. And there are about 650 to 680,000 students being served by community colleges. We do a lot of work around academic transfer. We're the first 2 years of that, but we do major workforce training. And we also do a lot of dual credit. About 93% of the dual credit being offered in the state is being performed by community colleges. And I do want to say about 70% of students who earn a bachelor degree have some community college also. So for us, it was about sustainability of all community colleges and making sure all Texans were being served. And in the end, it is about that workforce and being competitive. And so when the commission was put together and the outcomes-based funding model was where we were heading, we did look at a lot of different models across the country. We saw what other states were doing. And as the recommendations came forward, I was very involved with the Texas Association of Community Colleges, which represents our community colleges across the state. And we made sure where we were addressing their concerns. In the end, we have unanimous support for these recommendations, and that's from all sizes of community colleges. And there's a lot of important components of that. There was a real emphasis to make sure that rural and small colleges were going to be receiving adequate funding. There was a model that came forward that was not the standard static allocation model that we had had before. And what's that really mean? As enrollment increased, which it largely increased at the bigger institutions, the funds were just being reallocated among the pie. And so large institutions, if they grew more than the state average, would get additional funds. colleges that didn't grow at the state average would lose money. So even if you had growth in enrollment, you were still losing money. We did have a model that was about 12 to 15% performance funding based off of the state appropriations, but that was a small part of our overall budget. So as we work through these outcomes, they really do meet the core mission of what we're doing and what needs to be done to move the state forward in a competitive situation. And so the outcomes, they're based on really 4 key criteria. Their credentials of value, which represent degrees and certificates, and they can be for credit and non-credit. There's additional funding that will be awarded also based on those credentials of value being in high demand fields. And we're wanting those high demand fields to be broken down by region of the state. For example, in the Gulf Coast region, petrochemical, maritime, commercial aerospace, those are high demand. Health sciences is high demand throughout the state. But how do you make sure that there's a recognition of what needs to be done in each region? There's also an outcome for students who transfer to 4-year universities. That was really critical for the community colleges because about 60% of what we do is that transfer work. And then there was also an outcome for dual credit students. And it's dual credit students taking 15 hours or more along an academic or workforce pathway. So pretty clear what those outcomes need to be. The other thing that was important for the commission and for the community colleges is there's an additional incentive along all those categories for recognition of economically disadvantaged students and also academically disadvantaged and adult learners. And those are 3 very important populations of who community colleges serve. And so we wanted to make sure that there was a recognition of the additional supports that are needed to make sure those students get credentials. Community colleges accept 100% of whoever applies. And so if they're not academically ready, we're going to get them academically at least into the right path where they can get into the workforce. And so that was really important. Through this new model, about 90 to 95% of the funding is going to be based on outcomes. For an institution like San Jacinto College, we're going to be 100% outcomes based. And the colleges, they're all aligned around that. They want to see the details of the model, but with the additional funding that's already been recommended for funding the Community College Finance Commission, they are really committed to this, what's being set to be achieved through it. We see it as bold and transformational, and we're all about being bold. And we really see that what community colleges do is going to drive that workforce for the state. There's also another important component of it. There's a recognition for those smaller colleges and those rural colleges that need to meet the demands in their region, but don't necessarily have the same funding capabilities with limited property taxes. And so there is a foundational funding that will be allocated to those colleges based on a formula looking at tuition and fee capabilities, looking at property tax capabilities and how that flows into a model. And I know it's really important with having the business community on this presentation, this webinar, that property taxes for community colleges aren't across the board being funded across the state. There's only about 23% to 24% of the counties in the state that are in community college property districts. And so that's an important component also. But your bottom line question is, how do we feel? We're excited about it. The other important piece of it is on these credentials, there's also a recognition for non-credit. People may not know what non-credit is. It's continuing education. Commercial truck driving is a non-credit credential. And everywhere I go, I hear about how important truck driving is. Well, this will now be recognized in this model. And there's other similar kind of credentials on that non-credit side that are going to be recognized, which is critical too.
Well, thank you for that terrific explanation of the recommendations, and just speaking on behalf of your other colleagues throughout the state, the 50 community colleges, what's the receptivity from those different leaders from all those colleges?
Could you repeat that again? There was a buzz right when you said that.
Oh, it's okay. In terms of the receptivity that you've seen on the recommendations throughout the state with the other 50, with the 50 colleges, the other 49 that are out there, how do they feel about it?
As I said, the Community College Association, we did a vote of the membership and there was unanimous support.
Terrific.
And there continues to be unanimous support. I think it was a big deal when we saw the budget bill come through with that additional rider for funding. But there's definitely alignment. Now it all gets into the details, but we're all committed to that. And so you'll see that from across the state. And especially those rural and small colleges that have felt that they've been struggling in the past. They see this as really being a way for them to meet the needs of their community.
Excellent. So let's shift over to you, Woody, and you know, having been involved, obviously, in a leader in the business community throughout the state, and about these recommendations. Why do you think chambers should care about how these recommendations specifically help business and industry?
Well, I think the most important recommendation, and Brenda touched on it a little bit, is that the recommendation on the outcome side here, the incentives are dynamic. And what that means, even though we've priced out these changes at about for both the transformation from an input to an outcome system, the shoring up of the smaller schools, the additional financial aid, and then some more direct support for the community college to build capacity. When we price all that's about 325 million per year, or 650 million of increased dollars for the biennium. But what's not said there is on the outcomes incentives that Brenda did a very good job of laying out. We're not redividing the same pool. In other words, that pool will increase based on the community college's ability to produce more degrees. So in the second year of a biennium, if this plan is successful, I would expect that we would see perhaps a significant increase in the funding for those incentives. So when you look at the business community, what you really now have is a reliable partner in the government that says, you come up with a degree that you need, get the community college to sign on, it's approvable as a credential of value or a credential in high demand. And you've got a partner that's going to pay for those outcomes or pay for a portion of the cost of those outcomes. So it's not where it was before. You could do better and better, and you could get less money because you, as a collection of 50 schools, you were just dividing the same pot. Now the pot gets bigger. And so I think that makes the state now a reliable long-term partner with both the institutions and their business partners. So to me, that's the most important thing here that can really drive the outcomes and the degree potential, the potential to increase post-secondary attainment and credentials.
Yeah, it really does, as you mentioned, shift to a more business model, right? In terms
Yes.
of knowledge and performance. It's all about outcomes. If you're not performing as a business, you go away. So this
Right,
is
right. And it works the other way. If the colleges cannot, deliver their credentials, they'll get less state support. But we've priced this so that we can actually make the transformation with very few institutions being held harmless. And so the idea and that which should go away relatively quickly. So it hopefully would just be one biennium. And it would only be a few of the colleges. And then everybody would essentially be in a position that their future is theirs, and their business community in those regions with those schools, should be partners in that process.
Yeah, and really the partnership that you've described is really the key here. Let's talk with Todd a little bit about the legislative process. The leadership is obviously supportive. We saw the budget figures in the House and Senate come out. What is your sense, Todd, in regard to the legislation passing, and what are some of the obstacles that you can foresee there? And in viewing those obstacles, what can chambers do to help make sure this happens?
Sure. It's probably worth remembering that the community college financing system really hasn't been looked at seriously, certainly at this level of detail, in almost half a century. So I think what we've put together has been said is incredibly transformational. I think legislators are recognizing that. It was great to see the 650 million in the base budget in both chambers. In terms of what might, again, what might hurt it is that obviously there's a lot of groups fighting over this budget surplus. And a lot of needs across the state. But again, we would feel strongly that it's hard to think of something that could have more of an impact on increasing the revenues to the state in terms of economic activity than this bill, given its focus on workforce. We absolutely need a united voice between the community colleges who are already united and the business community. And we've got to have a unified voice among the chambers and making sure that their legislators know that this is important to them, given their own challenges in trying to find workforce, so that they're hearing it from all sorts of voices from all around the state. This isn't just a Dallas bill or a Houston bill. This is a Texas bill. And so we would just hope that our business chambers would get connected with Aim Higher Texas Policy Coalition, which we've created with Texas 2036 leadership and commit. And support their efforts throughout session and speak to your legislators about the importance of this bill and the need for reform here. So we're excited. We're really excited.
Great. We again, I want to remind our audience that we have the opportunity to insert questions in the chat, so please feel free to do so. Want to go back to what Woody was talking about in terms of the partnerships with the business community and how those are created. And Dr. Hillier, could you talk to us a little bit about some of the models that you've employed with employer engagement, in your part of your region, and just share some examples of some effective employer partnerships, and then consider how those might be scaled with some of these recommendations.
Thank you. So it's San Jack. We're in the heart of petrochem, maritime, the health sciences area, commercial aerospace, and I like to say we're really in the heart of what makes Houston cool, but really what drives the whole state economy. And we have some really great examples of being able to engage with industry, and we've done that with maritime and petrochem specifically, that I think you would find pretty amazing. For us, it's having those strategic conversations at the president, VP level, the plant manager, and then making sure how we're responding. We start out those meetings with, we need the good, bad, and the ugly. I don't need just to hear the good. I got to hear the bad and the ugly so we can figure out what to change. And from there, we have been able to redesign curriculum. And I'll give you petrochemical, for example. Industry helped us go through every phase of that curriculum, where we had math, what that math was, where the process safety was built into the program, defining the expectations. They have industry leaders in our classrooms. They provided externships for our faculty to get back into industry, so we could bring that into the classroom. And from a standpoint where they even supported a new facility that we built, and they did that with endorsing a tax increase, but also, more importantly, really putting a lot of blood and sweat into it. And I say that there were thousands of hours spent by industry in designing that component. We're doing the same thing with commercial aerospace, and designing programs to get those technicians in as quickly as they can. And so the model, again, is really being strategic, but then putting together that faculty industry group working together. Those kind of models, they take resources and they take investment, and what we end up doing is hiring really industry people who can lead those efforts. And help make sure we're communicating back with industry the right way, and we're responding and we're sharing data. And it's not just a one-time kind of deal. This is continuous. And so when I look at those models and I talk with industry and I hear what they're saying around hiring, they're letting us know as things are changing in their industry, how we can respond also. But those kind of models take resources. And so this new model that we've recommended through the commission really allows some capacity building that other smaller institutions are going to need. And that capacity building is some startup grants for workforce programs, being able to invest and put that equipment in, being able to design those kind of programs. Through the recommendations, about 50 million was added for that capacity building component of it. There was also a component around shared services, which is critically important, again, for those smaller institutions to build capacity. I always love the discussion that William Serrata, president at El Paso, says, you know, if I'm going to do a maritime program, I'm not going to go and build it out here. I'm going to go and just partner with Sanjack. And that's the same thing that we're doing with Houston Community College. So you can bridge and really gain some efficiencies. But the bottom line is how do you meet that workforce need? The other thing built into this funding model from the commission is additional work-based learning opportunities. How do you, our students need those opportunities. Our maritime program requires 2 summers working out on boats. And so industry is supporting that. Through this funding model, there will also be dollars set aside for work-based learning opportunities to build with industry partners. Maybe that's apprenticeships, maybe that's internships. What are those pieces of it? And designing those models for exactly what industry needs. Texas Workforce Commission has set aside about $15 million for nursing apprenticeships. Great model that needs to be really expanded, where you, our nursing students do clinical site work, and they had not been able to be paid for any of that. Well, this is aligning where you can have a certified nursing assistant come in and start to get into a licensed vocational nursing and associate degree nursing program, which is an RN, and be employed by that hospital as they're getting that clinical experience and aligning within that program. And we all know what a need there is for nurses. And so I think it's just getting innovative and creating those partnerships and those opportunities. And Texas Workforce has been at the table doing that with us also.
Yeah, it seems to me like these commission recommendations are really incentivizing those kinds of in terms of outcome base, it's going to really help from a benchmarking perspective, from a regional collaboration perspective, from a statewide collaborative space with each of these colleges that want to see everybody do well, as Woody mentioned, because of the financial piece of it being expanded with the budget, et cetera. And Todd, as part of that, and going to some of the financing and the funding, you know, how did the commission address some of the financial aid and the affordability of college? You know, community. I'm a product of a community college and did the 2+2 program, so appreciative of that. And I didn't have to pay as much in my first 2 years as I did my second 2 years. So talk to us a little bit about how that financial aid structure may work.
Well, just as a quick personal story, I grew up in a low-income household. I think my family contribution to go to 4 years of college was about $90 a year. And so I was incredibly blessed to be able to have that kind of access. You know, as Woody mentioned earlier, our economically disadvantaged population has always been our fastest growing population over the last couple of decades. It's close to 60% now. And so I think we recognize that it was critical that the Texas Educational Opportunity Grant, which is the financial aid pool that supports community colleges, was serving only about 28% of kids versus, and we're projecting that we would increase that to roughly 70%. So it would be roughly equivalent to the financial aid pool that supports our students in our 4-year universities. Obviously, we can also have the flexibility to increase non-credit. But I'm probably most excited about the dual credit opportunity for students. If we can provide financial aid to students to take college credit while in high school and K through 12, where you've got the food supports, you've got the transportation supports for our economically disadvantaged families. And we know the data is overwhelmingly clear that if a student graduates high school with 9 to 15 hours of college under their belt, they're 3 to 4 times more likely to complete their degree. They don't feel like they're an imposter because they've got college credit underneath their belt when they leave. I think it makes all the sense in the world, and I'm excited that that's part of these recommendations.
Terrific, Todd. And I'm going to close out our panel. Before I do, I want to give Chairman Hunt one more opportunity just to provide some closing comments and in regard to this particular effort and panel. Anything you'd like to share, Chairman Hunt?
Yeah, I think just to sum up, I mean, our recommendations are not incremental. I mean, we understood early on, based on some of my earlier comments, that now was the time, if there ever was a time to be transformational in our recommendations. I think the recommendations are that. I'm very encouraged by the response that we've gotten from the executive branch as well as leadership in the House and the Senate. But we really have a challenge. I mean, the numbers have been trending against us for a long time. I think we now have a response, but it's going to take us a while to stop the decline and then start closing our gap. But I think this could be the first significant step in moving in that direction, at least in the higher ed space.
Well, I just want to thank all of you again for your tremendous work in this area and your outstanding leadership. It's the epitome of you don't care how much you know until we know how much you care. And it's very obvious to me and to all of us about how much all of you care about the performance of our students and their success in finding worthwhile careers and being able to, as you said, Chairman Hunt, take care of their families, which I think is really extraordinary. So with that, I think we can give, I think all of our panelists and our guests don't mind us giving a little time back, but I do want to turn it over to my terrific friend here, our president CEO of the Texas Association of Business, Glenn Hammer, who's also a fellow foodie, and ask Glenn to close us out and also just to give us a call to action here. So thank you, Glenn, and thank you all of our panelists.
Thank you, AJ. I can't stop eating barbecue, and it's always fun when I'm with you. What a great group of sessions. I want to thank all of our panelists, Secretary Spellings and Commissioner Morath. They made the case for more accountability and the importance of measurement. Kelly Hall and Taylor Landin did a great job of explaining the importance of chamber involvement, and they're just two great leaders in our movement. And AJ, the closing panel just really helped bring everything together. Chairman Hunt, we're going to fight hard for the $650 million of additional funding. I know that's a big deal for our chairman, Massey Villarreal, as well as the chair of our C3 Foundation, Linda Head from Texas Lone Star College. And I want to thank the 60 or so chambers that have been part of this. We're all united together in making this the best session perhaps ever when it comes to workforce and education. But before you go, I'd like to ask you to join our efforts to support the Community College Commission effort, the Aim Higher effort, and also join Voter Voice, a text message system to your elected officials. Please take out your phone. Here we go. We're getting our phone out and scan the QR code on the slide screen that will tell you how to participate. As well, we will be following up with you on an email with the information about how to join. So again, I want to thank all of our panelists, all of our great chamber leaders, and let's together make this a historic session. Be well, be safe, stay warm. Thank you all.